6x8, big enough for 50 chickens. And we used these panels and just kind of like a hexagonal little pin out from them, 10 feet. So it was whatever, 60 feet, which would be whatever, 18 meters, right, of perimeter, all right? Plenty big enough for 50 birds for a day, you know, and you just rotate it around one corner, one corner, one corner, one corner, and when you went all the way around it with your hexagons, you just push this little bicycle wheel eggmobile up the field to another spot, and you do it again. Well, that worked so well that one day that I had grazed through with the cows, and I noticed the chickens going for the cow patties, and it was one of these things, these epiphanies, wow, look at those chickens, eat those, scratch out those and cow patties, and you couldn't even find them afterwards. So, well, what if I put this thing on a 3-point hitch and moved it with the cows? So I made a little 3-point hitch, and so I could mount it with the tractor and I could move it with the cows. Well, then that worked so well, then we went to the eggmobile, which is essentially a rubber-tired house on wheels. You could call it an RV for chickens or whatever. But the idea here is that we are linking this up. Now, this can work in so many applications. It can work in vineyards, orchards. I had a guy in Belize, Central America, write me, and he had a citrus grove. And he did this in his citrus groves because all of his diseases over-season or out-season the worms and stuff in the drop fruit. And so he started running one of these through his citrus. Guess his citrus anymore for the bugs. The chickens eat out all the worms, incorporate all the drop fruit. Now, not only does he not have the expensive pesticides, but now he has eggs to sell in the village. So it's a dual deal. All right. Why do we have two of them hooked together? Why don't we just have one? Let me explain the relative economies of scale. When you're in our, I'm just going to assume that we're kind of on the same page here today as far as, being lunatics and not endorsing the industrial food system and all that sort of thing, unless there's a Monsanto plant in here or something. But otherwise, our side, our movement, when we talk about economies of scale, people start to get really uncomfortable. That sounds very capitalistic, and that's what we've got. That's our problem, what we've got the reason we have the problems we have, economies of scale, and then monocultures, and monospecies, confinement housing, and all these things. But there are economies of scale. There absolutely are economies of scale. You can't get away from economies of scale because the big cost here is not the infrastructure. The cost is in the movement. The cost is, as we say, the cost is in being there. Driving out there with the tractor, or going in your forecart behind the mules, okay, or trudging out there with your oxen, or behind your yak, or whatever it is, whatever your motive power is, the cost is in transporting yourself out to where these eggmobiles are. And that cost of being there is the same whether it's 10 chickens or 800 chickens. So if we're going to invest in the cost of being there, whether it's by walking, four-wheeler, oxen, tractor, truck, we're going to invest in that, we may as well move as many critters as we can move while we're there. That's economies of scale. Now, when we started with this, we weren't in the egg business. We were trying to eliminate the parasiticide, grubicide, the Ivomec bill. Of course, the loss of our own religion and sanity, putting the cows through a head gate, things like that. I mean, you want to minimize the opportunities for the children to see you upset. And so reducing trips through the head gate is a real significant way for the children to not see you upset. I always say, before you get married, you need to sort cattle together. I mean, that exposes everything, doesn't it? Some of you are not, and you know exactly what I'm talking about. I'm not yelling at you. I'm making sure you hear what I say. Isn't that the truth? Okay. I don't like running the head gate any better than I mean, I don't despise it, but it certainly isn't my favorite job. I'd much rather do other things than sort cattle and run them through the head gate and make sure I catch them right and don't get kicked and pooped on and whatever else is going to happen there in that head gate. We actually early on with the very early on when we started appreciating, I'll talk more about this tomorrow, the genetic base of things. See, I think that in domestic livestock and plants too, I'm sure, we have really lost genetic strength over the last few decades, especially with all of our dependence on pharmaceuticals and vaccinations and things. We are moving, we are creating much weaker genetics than we have in the past. And we certainly see it in the poultry, and I'll address it here more later. But in our cows, we have heel fly warbles, they put on Warbecks. I don't know if you have those here in Australia or not. But it's a fly that chases them, hatches out in the spring, and when you see cows running with their tails straight up in the air, that's when the heel fly warbles away or after them. They lay they chase them and cling to their hoof, right here above their hoof, and then they lay eggs there. The eggs then hatch into little worms that burrow into their hide, and they come up through their body, and finally, late winter, they pop out on their backs and make grubs about yay long, big old white grubs. And at that point, they go from anaerobic to aerobic. So they secrete a saliva that makes a hole in the hide, and it's a breath hole. Yeah, this is really a great way to start the morning. And they just sit there as grubs and grow then under the skin with this hole. And of course, they destroy the value of hides as well. And we would go out in the spring, and Teresa and I, and run through the head gate. It never affected the cows. Cows get tough; they're immune to it. But it's the yearling calves, and we run through the head gate, and we'd actually use what worked the best was an old Coke bottle, and you just get that breath hole and just jam down on that Coke bottle, and that old grub would just pop right up out of there like a zit, like and it would jump up in that. I mean, you can certainly do it by hand, but then some of it would hit you in the face and all that. Not very fun. So the Coke bottle gave a little bit of protection there, and of course we'd pop them out, and we started registering which calves had them, and we started culling the cows that had the calves. I mean, you've got 50 cows, and 3 of them have calves with 1, and 3 of them have calves with 15. And of course, the ones with 15 always look scruffier and thinner and poor. And so we began an aggressive culling campaign to get rid of those, to cull the cows that had the calves that had them. And in just no time at all, we were getting clean calves. Well, anyway, that grub, its vulnerable time is when it pupates, because it has to come out of that hole in the back and roll out on the ground and sit there for about 3 days till it then pupates into a fly, and then starts to cycle over again. Well, that's a pretty vulnerable time with that big white. And you know what that looks like to a chicken? That big white. I mean, that's ice cream, boy. That's a true Sunday, you know, and I mean, they just go along. So it was that kind of stuff that we were trying to attack with the eggmobiles. That was our whole goal with the eggmobiles. So when we started, we only had 100 layers. We didn't want any more chickens than we really needed to do the job. And those chickens just lived off the land. You know, they didn't really require any feed at all. Wonderful eggs, lived off the land, and just they'll go out about 200 meters from a radius. So in other words, wherever the eggmobiles are parked, the chickens will go out in a total circle of about 400 meters in diameter, which is a pretty big area. So 100 birds, of course, they could just cream that area for little, you know, warble, you know, grubs and grasshoppers and crickets and, of course, fly maggots and all the different things, you know, any seed droppings along the edge of the woods and whatever, you know, they'd find all that in that area. But here's the problem. To start the tractor and go out there, sometimes, you know, as much as almost a mile away, and move those eggmobiles, and then go out in the afternoon and gather eggs, and then go out after dark and drop the doors on them so the predators don't go in. 3 trips in a day for, you know, 4 dozen eggs. Fortunately, we were eliminating all of our corral handling, our head gate, and our Ivermectin grubicide. So, you know, that is a huge cost right there. But even with that, to go to, you know, to go to that effort for 4 dozen eggs, you got to sell eggs for 20 bucks a dozen to make it work. Okay? Now, obviously, if you didn't have layers in there, you just had, we actually tried this. Just what if you just throw some roosters or bannies or whatever in there? And the problem with those, we couldn't keep them home. We couldn't keep them there because they didn't have enough of a nesting instinct to go. So what we've learned is to make this work, you can't put pullets. You can't. I mean, you have to put layers in there so they have enough nesting instinct to want to go and lay in the nest. Nothing else will feel that nesting urge, that homing urge. And believe me, you don't want these birds wandering around because if they wander around, they will always pick the swing on the back porch and the steering wheel on the tractor in the shop as their home. And a chicken always leaves a calling card wherever she finds home. So that does not make Mama happy, and when Mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. So this is land extensive. The eggmobiles are land extensive. The whole idea here is that we're trying to let those birds range as far as they will to cover as much ground as they can as a pasture sanitizer. All right? Later, we're going to see a land intensive model with the feather net. Okay? But these are totally different models. Why are we running 800 birds in the 2 eggmobiles? Because of economies of scale. The cost is in being there. And so although we are now having to supplement them with feed, now we're bringing in, you know, $130, $150 worth of eggs, or, you know, let's say 40 dozen worth of eggs on that trip, and getting that for the work involved, as opposed to just 4 dozen. All right? So that's the compromise we make. We make the compromise, yes, we will feed them, we will supplementally feed them, because remember, 800 birds are not going to go more than 200 meters from the eggmobile any more than 10 birds, okay? They will only go about 200 meters. So those 800 will cream that area much quicker. They need the supplemental feed, all right? But that makes the economies of scale so that our cost of being there now, we're handling far more volume per trip. Does that make sense? Now, don't get hung up with exactly the design of these things. As you can see, I mean, here's the first big one we made. Its wheels are outboard. Here's second generation, the wheels are inboard. We haven't made any more of these. I don't have a problem with them, except that they're kind of wide to get through gates. And it's very low. You can see how low it is to the ground. You can actually, if you get into a ruddy or a dip situation, you can drag the back end. You notice now we're making them with the back end sloped up here, like a Winnebago, so you can come out of that, gas station and not drag your tail end as you come out. These are hooked together, but I've seen people make these out of broken boats, yachts. I've seen them make them out of hay wagon chassis. Now the thing about a hay wagon chassis, if you go away from a trailer and you go to a chassis, remember you've got to make these walls so strong that when it goes through a dip, the wheels will actually come up off the ground because it's rigid. If you watch a hay wagon, if you're pulling a hay wagon through the field and you go through a dip, you'll watch that wagon bed. It flexes, okay. But if you've got a square box on there and it can't flex, either the tire has to stay up off the ground, or it's going to rip out your sill plates and rip out your joints. Okay, so I actually don't recommend hay wagon chassis for that reason. You've got to know something about design and building to stress that thing and make it strong enough that when you go kittywampus through one of those through a dip in your field, you don't hear a big rip and break off the joint. I've seen them. Okay, so we recommend trailers because a trailer can move anyway and you don't have the other tire. I've seen them made out of old hay loaders, the old slanted hay loaders. Tip it forward, set it down, put a hitch on the top, extend the sides a little bit. Boom, you got it. See them made out of school buses. Lots of them out of school buses, self-propelled. You probably want to put a barrier in front of the seat, But self-propelled. I've seen it rip out the seats and drive them out through the field. We had an apprentice make one out of an old pickup chassis. He just bought an old pickup truck for about $500, stripped it down to the chassis. We took the sawmill and ripped him out some nice boards, and he built a box on the back of this pickup truck, and then hooked a second trailer type behind it, so he had a double thing. But it was self-propelled. The truck had four-wheel drive. He just left it in there. So he just run out there in the morning on a four-wheeler and or walk out there and just get in the truck and start it and go. Of course, it made it real interesting when the truck doesn't start. You have to take it to the shop and you have to explain to the shop that we're going to be pulling in 150 chickens in this thing. So you might want to spread a little more than the grease cloth. So don't get hung up on that it has to look like this. It's got to be this kind of chassis, but there are obviously design principles I do want you to notice. One is that the roof is flat. We used to make a slanted roof. We found that just complicated the project. I mean, even on a very flat field, it's going to be a little off. I mean, it's a trailer. It's not going to sit flat. So, and it doesn't take much of a slant to make water run off a roof. So just keep it simple, make a flat roof, and that works just fine. Obviously, the reason that we have two instead of one great big one is simply ease of construction. And by making a train, you can turn better. It's much more maneuverable to make two. These are 20 feet long, 12 feet wide, and just tall enough to stand up in. By making two instead of one, 40 feet, it obviously greatly reduces the weight on your axles, makes them much more maneuverable. But we've got about, what have we got? We've got 12 of these, I guess. And not all of them are 12. Some of them are 8 by 16 on some of the rental farms where we don't have big wide gates. We can't get stuff through here. Of course, you know, on the rental farms, most of the landlords don't have all internal electric fencing yet. They will by the time we're done, but some of them still have permanent, you know, physical woven wire fence internal with pipe gates, and generally they aren't, you know, I mean, this guy here, this is 12 feet, and you got another 3 feet with the tires sticking out, that's 15. That makes it pretty tight getting through a 16-foot gate. So they will go, you can see how far they are coming out of here, okay? They'll definitely go out far from it. All right, so here's the door. Now what we found is that we can go up to as high as 400 birds in here. Notice the slatted floor has a slatted floor with poultry netting on top of it. And that's to keep raccoons and possums and things from foxes from being able to reach in and grab legs and pull them off and shred the legs. And then you go in there in the morning, there's a chicken sitting there, you roll her over and she got a shredded leg where, you know, something grabbed her. So the netting on the floor provides that, and the wooden slats make it nice and strong for us to walk on, so we're not walking on eggs. All right, the chicken ladder here is exactly what it looks like. It's a chicken ladder, and it has a little hangy thing underneath that you can pull it down and slip it in underneath. Now, just so you know, there are enough of these now around the world that you can get automatic timed pop slats now. I had an Amish guy. You know, they don't use electricity or anything, and he made one of these with a guillotine door on a wind-up alarm clock with a piece of fishing string that pulled a trigger out of a hasp, and he set the alarm clock to go off after dark. And as it wound up, it wound the fishing line off of this little finger, and when it came out, then the door, you know, flopped down. I had another guy came up to me and I was speaking at a conference. He says, "I want to thank you for making me the best deer hunter in the county." I said, "How's that?" He said, "Well, I was too lazy to go out there and close my door all the time, so he rigged up a trigger and hung an old disc, you know, from a disc off, like a plate off of it, and took his 243, went out in the evening with a laser scope and on his front porch, and he could shoot that thing half a mile, and he got to where he could hit that hanging disc, boom, you know, and it would knock a trigger and drop the door down. You know, I mean, there are all kinds of things and ways to do this. We've got interns. All right, they got to have something to do at night. All right, so I mean, you know, there are lots of different things that you can do here, but the key that I'm going to tell you is that when we go up to 400 birds in here, the aggressive birds, the big bossy birds, and believe me, you want to, you know, peck order, and the bossy birds will sit around this door and not let the timid ones come in. And once you get to a certain density in there, so what we found was if we went around to the other side and put another door on the other side, then, you know, the bossy ones couldn't be bossy at both doors at once, and so then they went in. And so allowing a second place of entrance and escape allows you to push your density up. Remember, 400 birds in one. These are only 240 square feet, so 400 birds. I mean, they're in there at almost 2 birds per square foot. That's pretty dense. And yet, when they sleep, they still only take, 2/3 of the floor. When chickens sleep together, they don't take much room. I mean, you can get, 4 birds in a square foot when they sleep together. They carry their own feeder. Now, between this and these, there's 4 of these. These each carry 100 pounds inside. So you got 100 pounds inside and about 2,000 pounds outside. Big principle here, chores. My dad's benchmark was that no person can spend more than 4 hours a day doing chores without burning out. Now, what are chores? Chores are things that have to be done every single day at about the same time. That's a chore. If it doesn't have to be done every day, or if it can be done at 10 o'clock or 2 o'clock or noon, then it's not a chore because it's flexible. Chores are like washing dishes. All right? Washing clothes are not chores. You can do that anytime, unless the only day you can do them is Saturday, and then it becomes a chore. I mean, anyway, chores are something that has to be done every single day. So the whole idea here is to reduce chore time by carrying enough volume of supplement that we're not having to go out there every day and feed birds. And throughout this day, I'm going to be really hammering efficiency, because this is not just about, we're in this wonderful fantasy, world of farming, and let's go out and meet the chickens this morning. Hi, ladies. How are you doing? Yeah. I mean, that's all nice and it's all romantic, but we farmers, we got to be efficient. I mean, if we're just out here lollygagging around and repeating jobs that don't need to be repeated, that's time that we can't do something else, whether it's make progress or read a book or take the wife to dinner, whatever. So I'm going to hammer on this reducing chore time. So because I meet so many farmers that every single morning they go out and they dip some feed out with a 5-gallon bucket, put it on a 4-wheeler, and drive out and feed the birds every single day. We've got to look at how we reduce that daily chore time and that daily run across the field. All right? Because that eats up our time. It burns up our time. So we carry this feed. We've got our dip buckets right here, and this carries a lot of feed for us. Here is so we don't have to take out all the time. Here's the water system. This is just nothing more than a little float valve sitting in this indestructible rubber bucket. Of course, that sits down on the ground when you move it. And notice that the water line is air hose. This is one of those roll-up, garden hose roll-up thingy-wingies. All right, and that holds about 30 meters, chuck full, 30 meters of garden hose, but it'll hold 150 meters of 3/8 inch air hose. And the air hose is way cheaper, very supple, and obviously way, way thinner, so you can roll up 150 meters. Now suddenly you can park that eggmobile out in the middle of the field and roll that air hose out to your trunk lines, to your water system, all right, and hook it up. And it gives you a tremendous amount of flexibility where that eggmobile is, because obviously you want to be able to put that, ideally, in the perfect world, you'd be able to put that eggmobile anywhere on your farm. Okay? But you can't carry water to it. There again, you can't tote water around the farm. Believe me, you got to put in water lines. Black plastic pipe isn't that expensive. You get a subsoiler with the tube in the back, and we put in 2 miles of water line in a day, just as fast as you can walk. You can just lay water line, all right, with with a subsoiler shank and the tube in the back. You just let the pipe feed down in there, and as fast as you can walk, just take the tractor and you can lay water line. It's cheap. When you start adding up transporting water, I don't care whether it's in a closed 5-gallon bucket or a cistern that runs with this thing, water's heavy. And these things, you got to remember, when you go in there with 400 chickens weighing 6 pounds, that's 2,400 pounds of chicken. These things get heavy when all the chickens are in there. And so you start carrying, 100 gallons of water, that's only 800 pounds of water. I mean, and you get into if your field's a little bit wet or something like that, next thing you know, your tires are sinking down in the field, and you got ruts, and you're stuck, and then you got to call the neighbors, and then it's a bad day. So, put in your water line, okay? Put in your water line. Here you can see that netting on top of these little slats here, okay? Now, how do we train them to go in? First of all, remember I said we don't put in, and we have tried this. So all these things I'm telling you, have a whole history of mistakes. Right? We learn a lot more from our failures than our successes. So when I say don't even attempt this without birds that are laying, oh well, you can go ahead if you want to, but you'll find out just like we did. They've got to be laying. All right, so the chickens are laying. Whatever goes in here is laying. All right. So they go in here day one. In other words, you can't put them in there 2 weeks before they start to lay. Well, I'm going to get a jump on this thing. No, it doesn't work. They've got to be laying so they have this nesting instinct. All right. So you put them in there, they're laying. We lock them in there the first day. They're not happy. All right. But it's only one day. All right. They have to lay, eat, sleep, drink, all in there enclosed in one day. Day 2, we open the doors at daybreak. Let them all, and they come up and they see those open, chicken ladders, and they, come down them. And very, very timid at the beginning, but that's okay. And they get down. All right. Well, about 10 o'clock in the morning comes along. They're out. Oh, they're just enjoying being outside, eating bugs and crickets and all that stuff. They just, you can just see them happy. About 10 o'clock, she starts. Where did I go yesterday? I got to find my place. Right? Let's see, yesterday. Now a chicken doesn't have the biggest brain in the world. But she does know everything she needs to know to be a successful chicken. And she knows that she wants to find this nest where yesterday, oh yeah, it was up inside there. Yeah, so they go over and they walk back up that chicken ladder and they go inside and they find the nest box. They lay their egg. Well, I'm going to go back outside again. The whole idea here is that very first day to get them to go up and down that chicken ladder 2 or 3 times. That very first day. Okay? They had to be locked in the first day to lay in there the first. Are you with me? That's why they had to be locked in there. All right. So then they go out. They go into the idea. All right. Now the sun starts to set in the west. I guess it sets in the west the same as it does where we are. It's this north and south thing that's a problem. So the sun begins to go down, and so we go out. Well, we put on a rain suit, get a long bamboo pole or something, and go in and sit under the eggmobile. Okay? Because instinctively, they know, again, chicken's not the smartest thing in the world, but they know that I don't want to settle down here and sleep out here in the middle of the field. That seems kind of vulnerable to me. And so they start looking around. They look for a little protection. Well, guess where they're going to go? Right under that eggmobile. I don't want anybody to tell me, well, why don't you just go out and wrap it with poultry netting? Yeah, we've done that. We've tried that so many times. And I mean, you got to make it so tight. You remember, you got the ramps, you got the hitch, you got the wheels, you got all this stuff. And by the time you put it up tight enough that the chickens can't find a little spot, I mean, they're gonna root under it. You got to make sure it's tacked to the ground, it's stapled to the time you go through it. You might as well just go out and sit there with a book underneath, with a bamboo pole, and keep them from settling down underneath. So they wander around. And remember, you're not letting them settle down underneath. It's starting to get darker and darker. They get agitated. They're walking around. They're looking at me. They got their head up and they're kind of looking around. Chicken kind of looks. They're looking at you underneath there. When's you gonna let me come in there? Now, about 2/3 of them will finally give up and walk up the ramps inside. 1/3 of them, the first night, won't. They just won't get it. It'll finally get dark, and they finally just quit circling and being at it, and they just clump down on the grass and go, oh, I'm tired. I've had this terrible day. and they just hunker down on the grass. All right. So then you just go catch them and put them in. All right. That's actually day 2. All right. Day 1 they were locked in. Day 2, that's the end of day 2. End of day 2. Day 3, same procedure. Let them out. They go. Late in the day, the sun starts to go. You get out there, plenty early with your rain suit. There's a reason you wear the rain suit, right? You're underneath. Everybody's with me. I don't have to explain that one, right? You put on your rain suit and you climb under there with your bamboo pole. This night, all of them will go in, but about 20. Now I'm dealing with groups of 400, okay? So all of them, but about 20 is most. That's the end of day 3. Catch those and put them in. Day 4, same procedure. You might have about 2 or 3 to catch. And anybody that doesn't go in on day 5, you should just take them, put them in a crate on your 4-wheeler and take them into wherever you have, jail, and just, they're just going to be incorrigibles. And forget it. But that very, very seldom happens, actually. By day 4, they all go in. Now, here's the kicker. If you miss the first night, if your mother dies, or the worst thing, imagine the worst thing in the world. I don't care what it is. If you miss the first night, you just bought yourself 10 days of training. Let that be a lesson to you young parents that wonder, how soon should I start disciplining my children? The second they defy. Apply the port of education to the seat of knowledge. Early! All right. Lots of object lessons in farming for life. All right. So that first night, everybody with me? The first night. If you let that 1/3 that doesn't get it, that first night, if you give them a night outside, they will become habitual offenders. Okay? They need to go in there that first night. Believe me, I've been there and done that. Okay? So, that's your training regimen. Nest boxes. Notice, these nest boxes, these are regular factory-made nest boxes. They're sheet metal with a slanted top, so the chickens can't get up in them or get on top of them. But they have perch boards. Notice here the spindles on top makes it very difficult for them. I see she's figured out a way to stand right there. That's not normal. You know what? I think that one actually might be tipped off to the side. I think there's something wrong with that spindle on top. Normally it's supposed to be right here, and they're not supposed to be able to get up in there. You always want spindles on top of your feeders. You notice that the side is just sheet metal. I mean, this is very, very simple construction here. Okay. There's a day's egg. So how do we keep these eggs clean? How do we make putting them away efficient? Notice how clean those eggs are. All right, several things about nest boxes. First of all, when we gather at roughly 4 o'clock in the afternoon, 2/3 of the eggs will be laid by noon, 1/3 afternoon. So by roughly 4 in the afternoon, they're going to have, there might be a couple stragglers late in the day, but not very many. They're going to be laid by that time. All right. So you notice again the slanted top. They can't sit on the top. But these perch boards are critical. You notice these here are put up. Heidi's gathering these out of here, and then this is going to pivot up. The number one frustration of people doing small-scale egg production is cleaning eggs. If you have to clean more than 10% of your eggs, there's something wrong with the management. Now, there are a lot of things that can be wrong with the management. One can be that you're not feeding free choice oyster shell to keep their calcium up. So your shells are thin and the eggs are brittle. That could be one. Number two, it could be the chickens are laying too prolifically. That's one reason why we don't use hybrids. We use the old standard bred type of bird. They lay about 20 eggs a year fewer than the Leghorn cross, DeKalb Goldens and stuff, and cherry eggers and red comets and all these things. But that reduction in egg production means that they're not overrunning the ability of their body to metabolize enough calcium to keep the shells strong. All right? So it takes some pretty high-tech feeding if you're going to run these hybrid birds that are basically little itty-bitty egg factories. And so what we want is a much bigger, I will talk more about genetics in a little bit, but we want a bigger bodied bird that doesn't lay quite as many eggs. Another issue could be, obviously, in these kind of situations, it can be mud. And if you get a bunch of rain and they just get muddy, well, that's just the way it is. That happens, all right? But that's one reason why to get these nest boxes, where am I? Oh, I'm sorry, I'm going ahead instead of behind. To get these nest boxes up off the ground. You see these birds walking here? Another real common problem is letting these nest boxes be down close to the ground. If a chicken can stand on the floor and flat foot look in a nest box, it's too low. Because they're naturally curious. And they walk along here, and if they can look right into that thing, it's like an interesting thing in there. It's like when they lay their eggs, they have no idea what those things are. Oh, that's an interesting thing, Go play with that a while. I wonder what that was. That's okay. And so it's like there's no memory, and they look in there and they see that and it looks inviting in there, and they go in there and start messing around. The first thing you know, they've broken an egg. As soon as they break an egg, they eat it, and then of course they're not very sanitary eaters, so of course they slop it all on the next one, and the next one now has these interesting little, orange around it, and so then they eat that one, and then, and then the whole thing just breaks down. No pun intended, breaks down. So, what you want to do is have these boxes up high enough that no chicken just haphazardly walking by, going to the strip mall, can see and get distracted and go in there. They've got to make an effort to jump up on the perch board, and they've got to make an effort to want to go up in there and have a reason to want to go up in there, not just because they got distracted. Now, if you have an egg eater, if that's a problem, and you're having, egg, and that is very much, you can get egg eaters. I mean, that's people, you can get egg eaters. The way to break them is to hang a piece of denim, burlap, cloth, any kind of veil, cloth material, hang it down in front of these nest boxes. to darken them down. Here's the deal. The only time birds, poultry, chickens, only time birds like and seek darkness is for the privacy of laying eggs. They don't seek dark to mate. Yeah, they like to do it in the light. All right. So they don't seek darkness to mate. They don't seek darkness to sleep. I mean, they actually seek to stay in the light for as long as possible. So what will happen is, now we run one nest box to 10 hens. That's our rule of thumb. One nest box to 10 hens. And what you'll see is that the relative number of eggs in given boxes will vary from day to day depending on the orientation of the eggmobile. Because one day the sun might come in here and these are light, you won't get very much egg laying in there. Next day it might turn around and this is in the shadows and the sun's coming in, up here, and these get light use. Chickens, they like their privacy. They love their privacy in the dark, when they lay their eggs. And so by darkening, and the only time chickens are drawn to dark is to lay eggs. They're not drawn to it any other time, not for eating, mating, sleeping, or anything else. In fact, they will move as the sun goes down in the evening. They will move to where it stays light the longest to stay in light the longest. Light and birds are just symbiotic. That's why whenever you see old chicken, you can always tell if it's an old chicken house or a piggery by the number of windows. Because chickens and light are magic, and that has a lot to do with their hormone system and all that. Bedding in the nest boxes. You can use any kind of bedding you want to use as long as it doesn't attract scratching. So, sawdust, wood chips, rice hulls, straw, hay. But because we have it, we use old hay. But we use old, moldy, junky hay. If you use nice, bright, hay that you want to feed your cows, it'll have too much chaff and seeds and goody little leaves on it and stimulate them to go in there and scratch around. When she goes in and starts scratching around, she's gonna break eggs. So if you have an egg eater or you have a scratch, if you have any kind of a real serious breakage problem, and I would say a serious breakage problem would be that if you have more than 10% of the eggs that you gather have been in a nest of broken eggs, you've got a breakage problem. That's not that many, 10%, all right? We don't like to wash more than 10%. We like to use old, junky, moldy hay that has no seeds, no enticement. Hang your veil down. The chicken will push through it. Boy, if she's wanting to lay an egg, she will absolutely seek a dark place, and she'll go in there and lay an egg, and then she'll come out. The beauty is that the extra darkness that the veil creates will make her not want to loiter. What you're trying to do is not make an enticing place for a bird to go in unless she's busy, and to get out as soon as she's done, because she can't see very well in the dark and doesn't want to stay in there. So it's all about reducing that. I think, for example, you talk about the number of ways that we can stack poultry on enterprises. I think that confinement livestock feeding operations, look, I don't like them, but I'll tell you what, a feedlot, a confinement dairy, one of their biggest problems is flies, right? And those herbivores pass through a lot of undigested feed in their manure, all right? One cow, if you go and you measure the manure from a regular confinement, silage or grain-fed dairy, challenge-fed dairy, let's say, you'll find that every cow can support with bypass materials one chicken. 100 cows, 100 chickens, 1,000 cows, 1,000 chickens. All right. So and same for a feedlot. Same for a feedlot. Okay, so I want you to think for a minute. You could take one of these livestock feeding operations, and of course the reason that the operators don't want to let chickens in there is because they're afraid the chickens are going to jump up into feed bunks, right, eat the feed, poop in there, and then the cows are eating chicken poop, and then we got coccidia, we've got, you know, sanitation issues in the livestock. Believe me, if you hung a veil down in front of the feed bunk and made it black in there, those cows would eat that, push through that veil, and eat their feed just as well as they do being able to see it. A cow doesn't even look at what she eats. I mean, you know as well as I do that you can have a blind calf and they can find clover any kind of day. I mean, if you had a nose the size of a cow, you could find anything by smelling. Okay? So they will go ahead and push through. The chickens won't go in there because they don't want to go in the dark. And imagine if every confinement livestock place had enough chickens, you know, one per animal. Suddenly, you could build entire, you know, full-time farming enterprises just dovetailing a salvage operation on the manure and eliminate the bugs and the flies and all that in a confinement facility. Well, shoot, you know, it might be that the livestock operation would pay you to put your chickens there. You know, like orchardists pay beehives to come and, you know, and pollinate. You know, have a you know, a poultry sanitation operation. All right. Okay, so I'm just trying to give you the permutations on this principle of chickens don't like dark. I mean, there's a lot of applications to this that aren't just, you know, little backyard stuff. There's real commercial applications here in the chickens don't like dark. Material in the boxes, I think we covered that. You just don't want it to be an enticement for them to scratch in there. And you notice this lip here. This is real. This is another thing. I'm harping on these things because I get onto a lot of farms, and I'm really harping on things that I see that are not good. This front panel here needs to be at least 6 or 7, even 8 inches. Here's the thing: the chickens, don't worry. The chickens are going to figure out how to get in there. If a chicken wants to get in a place, I mean, she can push through a pretty small place. All right. The problem is when we put a very short retainer plate here on the front, a very short retainer plate. It doesn't take, number one, the box is not as dark. Number two, the chicken is not sitting down there inside, and it's not as private, and it's conducive to her scratching stuff out. Okay? So we want to make sure that she sits way down inside here. Now when we gather those eggs, we're going to flip those perch boards up here so the chickens can't get in. The number one reason for dirty eggs in small-scale, non-commercial operations, the number one reason is chickens roosting in the nest boxes. So get those chickens locked out of those nest boxes for night. All right? Is everybody with me on these hinged perch boards? It makes it real simple, and you can retrofit these on any boxes that you want to do. If you use, I mean, nests can be as simple as a 5-gallon bucket tipped on its edge. What are we going to do though? We're going to make sure that we have half of that bucket. We're not going to put a little 2-inch sealed retainer on there. We're going to take that 5-gallon. Do you call them 5-gallon? You probably don't call them 5-gallon buckets here. You call them something liters.
20 liters.
20-liter bucket. All right. We're talking about the same thing. You know, the world revolves around 20-liter buckets. I mean, if you don't have them, the world would stop tomorrow. Okay. So you got that front. So you're gonna put that retainer board clear up here to the halfway point. Then you're gonna have some sort of gizmo that allows you to close off that top. I mean, you can apple crates, milk crates. There are all kinds of things. You can go to store and buy plastic boxes. I mean, you can make this stuff out of anything. Just remember these principles. You want a deep sill plate, and you want a closable entrance here for when you gather the eggs. So now you can see here the the volume that we're able to go in from. When we built this very first eggmobile, we had this so that we could get access from the outside to gather eggs instead of having to walk inside. But since, this is my niece here, Heidi, but since we were using primarily children labor to go gather eggs, they couldn't reach up in there from the outside because why are they, you say, well, why don't you just lower them? What would happen if we lower them? The chickens can look in the boxes. So you've got to get them up on the wall. So you add the ground to the height of the boxes, and suddenly you're too high for the kids to reach in. So they just start going in all the time. So we quit that. I mean that unnecessarily complicated the construction. So now it's just a wall. They just go in and gather, and it's okay. All right. So putting away eggs. These things have to go in dry. They can't go in wet. I don't know how the regulations are here in Australia, but in the U.S., if you have any clinging debris whatsoever, a piece of straw, a feather, manure, piece of egg yolk, a piece of cardboard, that's an inedible egg. And in 100 eggs, you can only legally sell them if there are fewer than 2 inedible eggs in 100 by law. Okay? And this whole thing is quite fascinating because we actually lost a restaurant once. One of the closest that we had with a food scare was we had one of our restaurants had a salmonella outbreak. And health department, of course, came right in there, and it was because they had was it seven people went to the ER for really bad diarrhea. They suspected salmonella, food poisoning. They cultured it, found salmonella. Interviewed the 7, and the commonality was that they ate at this restaurant. They weren't related, like 3 of them were related, but anyway, the commonality was this restaurant, so they narrowed it down to this restaurant. Went in, saw our eggs in the room there, that they were unwashed. We don't wash an egg unless it's dirty. I mean, you don't have to. There's no reason to wash an egg unless it's dirty. So, because they hold a lot longer, they stay a lot fresher with that nice, bacterial film. Yeah, the chicken lays on it as she lays it. And so, anyway, the health inspector, as soon as she saw those eggs, she wrote on her report that was the cause for the salmonella and condemned them. And, of course, the chef, he calls me in a panic. Oh, what are we going to do? So I grabbed eggs and manure from where the eggs come in the field, sent them to a lab, paid a couple $100 to get a salmonella culture made on them, trying to get it, in about the same time the health department got their culture in. Make a long story short, it took 2 weeks. My report came back. Not only did we not have salmonella in the eggs, we didn't even have it in the manure. So I waited another week, didn't hear anything from the health department. So I called them. I said, well, what did your culture say? She said, oh, we didn't culture them. As soon as we saw unwashed eggs, that's been found on unwashed eggs, so that's what we put on as the reason.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for science. Of course, the chef said at the day he had fresh shrimp in there. He had a bunch of carrots with dirt on their roots, and it was through hollandaise sauce. And they had handled the hollandaise sauce very well. It was like 7 hours of raw egg, milk, and whatever, honey, sugar at room temperature, for like 7 hours. But anyway, so, I asked the lady, I said, the health department lady, I said, wait a minute, you didn't culture them? She said, no, there's no reason to, we just saw the eggs. So, well, you know, it could have come from, the chef had 6 things in the kitchen that it could have come from. They were all out, you know, on the thing. And she said, yeah, I know, but an unwashed egg is an inedible egg. I said, where's that in the regulations? I said, well, that's just my opinion. The power of these bureaucrats to harass you is unbelievable. So it turned out as we went through our, you know, politicians and stuff, that we had gotten into crossfire of intra-agency turf battles. We have one bureaucracy that regulates restaurants. That's the health department. Another bureaucracy that regulates farmers and what can be sold as edible product. And that's the Food Safety and Inspection Service. And under the auspices of the USDA, the U.S. Department of Agriculture. USDA. Well, the health department says the USDA is too friendly to farmers and lets them get by with murder. The USDA says that the health department is a bunch of, you know, harassment, tyrant Nazis, and these two agencies despise each other and are always trying to find a way to, the USDA, to prove that these guys are, you know, are ridiculous, and the health department to prove that the USDA is not protecting the public welfare. And we got caught in the crossfire of these two agencies. And anyway, that's what happened. So we want to be careful about adhering stuff to these eggs, even cardboard. Back to what I said, the eggs have to go in there dry. All right. Now in the industry, they wash these eggs with chlorine water. And if you've ever been to a commercial eggery and go to their washing place, you know, these eggs are coming in, they're all dirty because the chickens are all in these battery cages and they're just filthy. It's just manure all over. They come in, but they put a bunch of bleach and chlorine and high-powered chemicals in this wash water, which of course, you know, the jets come up and they break eggs. So the water is a funky, you know, manure or yellow. It is not a pretty sight. All right. So they come through here and they get washed, and then they have a big hair dryer, basically a hair dryer over top. I mean, it's big, and it dries the eggs before they go into the candling, and then they go into the, you know, the sorting stuff. The thing is, in the industry, none of the inspection has anything to do with salmonella or with actual, with anything, with pathogenicity, with anything that can hurt them. The only thing that the inspection does is check to make sure that you don't have, you know, hanging debris on the eggs, that you don't have any of this other, that it's not doesn't have ridges on it, that it's not especially long or especially round or has a flat side or, you know, any of those kind of things. And that if you say it's a grade A, it has the viscosity of the albumin and the air cell size to go with a grade A. And if you say it's a large or a medium, that your scales are large and medium. You can have you can have 2 grade Bs in a carton of grade As. You can have you can't have cracks and leakers. You can't have any inedible. You can only have 2 inedible eggs per 100. I mean, there's all these, you know, all these damages. What was interesting was that, so I got off of the phone with this health department lady, haranguing with her about the fact that number one, the regulations do not say you have to wash all eggs, and I got off with her, you know, saying, you mean you would rather all of our eggs go through a chlorine fecal soup bath than that they just come here. She says, well, look, you know, I just think that when people buy eggs, they just assume that they're washed, and that's just the way it ought to be. And I hung up the phone with her, livid as you can imagine. And you know how sometimes you hang up the phone and it just rings while your hand is still on it? Well, that's what happened. Hung up the phone and it rang. Picked it up. It was Alan Nation, editor of Stockman Grass Farm. I write a column for Stockman Grass Farm. And he'd just gotten back from a tour of France. And he said, hey, I want to tell you about France. He said, we went over there, we looked at eggs, and pork and different things. But he said, did you know that in France, it's illegal to sell a washed egg? In France, if an egg has to be washed, it can't be sold as a shell egg. It has to be cracked and go into a pasteurized product. Like egg beaters, like in a carton, a commercial where they're already cracked, and then pasteurized and sold. So here you got France, it's illegal to sell a washed egg. We got the U.S., I'm being harassed because I'm not washing every egg. It's just crazy. And of course, both cultures are seeing people drop like flies from their policies. Dead. 10:30. Time for a break. Ready for a break? Let's take a break. And we'll pick this right up in the next section. All right? We'll take a break till